Good afternoon, everyone. As Laura said, my name is Ravenscroft, the lead for St Albans Catholic Primary School and Bishop Challoner EdTech Demonstrator School. And I'm going to talk to you briefly this afternoon about the journey that we've been on with live lessons since March, what we've learned, the sort of pitfalls that we sort of fell into, and hopefully give you some of the sort of guidance we've now created from that, so you don't necessarily fall into those same. That's just not going to work how I want it to. Try again. It's completely froze. Hang on, 2 seconds. I've just completely lost all control on this. We'll go from there. Perfect. Sorry, we'll try that. Yeah, we go. So here we go. How we got where we currently are then? Like many of us, the joy that was those first few bewildering weeks in March, we got the call that we weren't going to be in school. And very quickly, I think like many of us, many teaching colleagues I've spoken to, we scrambled to put some work on the website. I remember those first few weeks, it was what can I convert into a PDF and upload it to a HTML site. Very quickly, we realised that wasn't going to be good enough for our students. Of course, at the time, we were very unsure and uncertain as to sort of the process for our Year 12s and our Year 10s. And we quickly realised that we could utilise 2 platforms we'd already got in school. Class charts, which we started setting homework tasks through, we were previously using for pastoral reasons. And then Microsoft Teams itself, that we were mainly using, truth be told, for sort of file sharing with students, and never really explored the capabilities of Teams as a meeting platform, even a live lesson platform, beyond somebody who was home, doing childcare, for example, attending a meeting where they'd normally be face-to-face. Of course, we quickly ran into the issue that is policies and safeguarding and all that kind of lark. Eventually got those things in place and then found ourselves delivering live lessons from around early June onwards, right through until a very well-earned summer holiday. Is there still need for live lessons now we're back in school? I'd say perhaps now more than ever that there is, perhaps now more than there was in March, for a couple of simple reasons. One, we had the joy of Boris gracing our TVs yesterday at 8 PM, right before Bake Off, telling us that this isn't going away and quite frankly things are only likely going to get worse in the near future. Exams, we are still, as of now in September, under the impression that summer exams next year will be taking place no matter what. So, or, at least for the foreseeable future, we're under that impression. And sequencing. I kind of alluded earlier that when we started with remote learning, when we were sort of forced to start with remote learning, we were in a position where it was almost anything will do. Get something out there that the students can actually engage with. And it's only towards the end of the lockdown period, or in terms of the end of that school summer term, that our lessons at Challoner, I think, sort of speaking to colleagues, that anecdotally the national picture was only towards the end we started to get to grips with sort of schemes of work and synchronising it or synchronising it. Of course, Ofsted's framework about sort of sequencing, if we have to move to a position where it's 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, we want to maintain that sort of sequence throughout those weeks and ensure that the learning that students are doing at home, where possible, is just as good as the learning they'll be doing in the classroom. But of course, we all know there is no substitute. I think, frankly, many people know now, there's no substitute for a classroom teacher in front of a live audience, but to the best ability we can do. How we present a live lesson then at our school, our teachers are the experts and they know what's best. We don't mandate, we don't dictate what they should be doing. What we have is we never prescribe how long or how a live lesson should flow, nor how long a teacher should be teaching for, i.e. talking to the students. Some members of staff use them to present as close to face-to-face lessons as possible, so I'll do very much what I'm doing now, which is presenting a presentation. Others are using them sort of tutorials and lectures. So like Amy alluded to, obviously we're very much talking about blended learning and interactivity, but it's very much me sort of dictating to you guys at the moment. And some staff are still now, even back in September, are using them as sort of informal drop-in sessions and lessons. Many teachers at our school, if not all teachers that are using Microsoft Teams to deliver live lessons, are doing a combination or a variation of these sort of 3 or 4 approaches. There's not necessarily one size fits all for a school or indeed departments or members of staff. Some of the problems we faced then from the off, there were 2 main barriers, as in any school, and they were students and the joys that are teachers. First and foremost, it was, what is Teams? What is this platform I'm now being asked to use? What is this thing that I've seen on my desktop as an icon since I got my laptop given to me that I've never clicked on? Second obvious question that follows on from that is, how do I actually use this thing? What is Teams and how am I going to use it? And then sort of the different category of students was the devices they're going to use to access it from home. For teachers, it was confidence in the platform, confidence in actually delivering live content. One of the things that became very apparent very early on for us when we tried to sort of demo and trialing the live lesson process was anxiety amongst our students that wasn't previously seen in a face-to-face environment. Teachers' willingness to do it was always a factor, which kind of sort of falls in line with the confidence. Standard resources. Obviously, we take for granted in the classroom pen, paper, calculators, and things like that. But do students have access to that at home? Teachers, once again, this is different. It was that classic, I've been using PowerPoint and a board marker for 20 years. I don't want to change. And of course, safeguarding. We can't do anything in school involving technology without the joy that is the S word of safeguarding. Well, hopefully what I want to do now is provide a few anecdotes, a few points for these things that I've identified here and sort of how we believe we go around them and how we sort of face them and came out the other end. So what is it and how I use it? The big question from everybody that we got, and unfortunately there was no overnight solution for this. What we very quickly endeavoured to get going with very quickly was we had digital champions in school to deliver CPD on one of them. We've basically got 4 or 5 members of staff from various different departments. I just happen to be computing and ICT, but my colleague in this is geography, history and science. And they very quickly got onto this process of putting together very basic informal CPD. Here's Teams, here's how we log in, here's how we set up a meeting and so forth. Consistent, making those consistent, of course, if we are working from home or when we were working from home, and even in school with timetables, times, opportunities aren't always available to all of us, so it's making them as consistent as possible. And of course, the production of guides and videos for our staff. So a couple of basic screenshot examples here. One on the left is a current YouTube video that went out at the start of this year for our students. And it's a very basic 6-minute video with my Dorset Black Country tones talking over, pointing out the different features of Microsoft Teams. So very sort of, not techie, but very just to the point, click here. But for our students at home who perhaps haven't been able to receive face-to-face training for whatever, or face-to-face lessons for whatever reason, it's turned out to be very useful. We do also have a guide that we produced. This was back in May now, presenting live with Microsoft Teams. Some of you, I believe, may have seen this. I've seen some names that I recognise in the participants list. But this guide, for those that are wondering, I'm sure Si's going to put the link in the chat at some point. It's on our single page on the EdTech Demonstrator website. It's basically a 27-page PDF going through some of the features of Teams and how they're useful for teachers presenting live, not only from a sort of engagement and teaching and learning perspective, but also features that you can turn on and off to make your life easier when you're dealing with a virtual classroom of 30 students, never mind a physical one. The devices that we use to access the live content. Now, I'm not necessarily talking here about the students that didn't have access to a device. Unfortunately, that was a completely different issue, and one that the DFE are trying to resolve and are still pushing towards trying to get a resolution for. But one of the things we found very quickly was many of our students, the only interaction they have with a traditional keyboard and mouse setup is in school, in a classroom. Many of them are accessing Teams lessons through a smartphone or a tablet. Now, if they don't have a physical keyboard, asking them to do sort of long form text questions whilst you're live in a lesson can be quite difficult. And as silly as it sounds, if they're on a smartphone, as soon as they enter the chat or open the chat feature, it covers the screen. So if they're looking at a presentation like you guys are now, all of a sudden they can't do 2 things at once like we're used to be able to do on a 13-inch or 15-inch monitor. How we got around that, some of the strategy that we put in place, is we make a point now of setting work that can be completed on paper every time. So even if it is writing an essay or writing a response to a question, we have it so that can be photographed and they can do it with a pen and paper sat next to them. Provide them a link, provide time, not a link, provide time for the students to pose questions and respond to them. So very much like we would do in the classroom setting, it can be very daunting, I know from experience, to talk at a screen and go, right, any questions? And you're checking your internet, is it still on? Is my screen still working? Because no one's actually responding to you, but definitely try and give them that time. And I think Amy alluded to it earlier in her presentation, encouraging microphone use where possible. The engagement, the interaction, it's one of the things that we're robbed of when we're out of the classroom with the students and we're just looking at a screen and they're not talking back at us. A lot of the best teaching that I've witnessed takes place in that interaction. It's not necessarily just giving them a worksheet and going off your pop. So please, obviously, try and encourage that as and where possible. Previously, unseen anxiety. I mentioned this one. This was a really sort of weird one, perhaps took me by surprise and probably shouldn't have done. I had many students who, in class, I've taught for years now, I can pose a question at them, and they're more than capable, more than happy, unless they've got particular reasons, to come back to me with an answer in front of the rest of the class. What we noticed very quickly is these same students, if I asked them in this kind of setting now to write student X, unmute yourself and answer the question that's on the board or answer the question that I've just asked, would freeze. They wouldn't do it, or in some cases they'd quite simply just leave the conversation. And these were not naughty or misbehaving students in classrooms. These are our grade 9, grade 8 computer science students at A level. So it wasn't a behaviour issue, it was pure anxiety of dealing with a screen in front of them rather than dealing with just a physical face-to-face classroom. Once again, unfortunately, there is no easy fix to this as such, but things that we found useful, and once again, this isn't from me trying to preach the converter, trying to patronise you, but a simple reassurance to the session that they're not going to be picked on, so to speak. But more than that is the opt-out. Okay, what we do with our students, especially at Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, we mandated with IT, I had a bit of a battle with this one, that the chat feature was left on. I think Amy mentioned it as well, that with the chat, you can get such a interaction with the student, even if it's not vocal, like I'm sort of talking at you now, having that ability to have the raise hand and chat feature on means that students can still engage with you. It could be a factor that they can't turn the microphone on because behind them, there's a little sibling crying, or there's a TV on, or somebody's doing the housework. So having the chat feature is key for that, getting that sort of student engagement. And it also gives them a way out where they don't have to unmute themselves and talk. Standard resources, as I say, this one kind of sort of took us by surprise when we started doing it, especially this side of September, was students joining a live lesson and having nothing more than a smartphone to their side. So no usual pen and paper that they have in a classroom. Once again, it's a really silly issue that we found, but it's something that can prohibit the learning. In terms of actually getting around this, of course, it's, remind them of school expectations, remind them of the guidance that they're meant to follow. And what we do, we have an expectations slide that goes at the start of every live interaction or live lesson or session, whatever you want to call it. And much like classroom rules that might be pinned on a school wall, these are quickly becoming the norm for them in our live lessons. They're very quickly, no matter who their teacher is, even if their style of delivery is very different to me, for example, that start of the lesson remains the same with the expectations and so forth. So as I say, once again, not preaching to converted here, it's just one of the issues that we found. Teachers, confidence and willingness. Obviously, we've probably all experienced this at some point in our careers. Understandably, many teachers were not overly excited by the prospect of having to sort of teach via Teams back in May, June, July. And once again, I suppose naturally there's a lack of confidence amongst staff in using this platform that they'd only really heard of now due to either sort of family quizzes taking place or indeed sharing resources with students in the years gone by. This one was where our digital champions came back in. We had members of staff in our school, as I mentioned earlier, who were our champions of the platform, were our champions of remote learning. And because it was a face that they recognised, a face that was familiar, offered them informal CPD, whether it be one-on-one or small groups or departmental, and they disseminated that information to heads of departments. That was one of the things that was really helpful for us in getting this sort of buy-in. Now, of course, we haven't necessarily got everyone buying into it yet, or every member of staff really sort of jumping at the bit to teach via Microsoft Teams or our live platform, but things have improved in terms of that aspect. And as I said, we did do training, and we've got a couple of screenshots here. Some of you may have attended the webinars back in July. It was July. But that one at the bottom there, you can see the date on it. It was last week, no, a couple of weeks ago. Thursday, dates are useless for me. Thursday, 10th of September. And this is our whole school staff on a Friday afternoon, once again, going through Teams and just the basic features. How do I present a PowerPoint? And it's little things like that. If we show them that you can do what you do in a normal classroom, but on this platform on your screen, the confidence slowly starts to build. And we actually got them to try and teach to each other at that point and present a little slide to one another and go through the process of asking questions. This is true, and we can't get around it. I mean, what's been nice, I think there's been a vindication in the media recently, or since March, that there is no substitute for live teaching. And no matter how far we go with live lessons in the next 6, 12, 18 months, how long this is going to last, there is no getting around that. They're very different. For me, my normal classroom in face-to-face is very much this kind of system. Teacher-led questioning at the start, introduce some new content, give them some tasks to engage with, whether it's individually or in groups, said individually there, and then some sort of closing formative assessment through questioning or Kahoot or whatever it might be at the end of the lesson. What I found when I tried to replicate that very early on and basically teach my normal way of teaching was I was attempting teacher-led questioning. As I said, I had many students through either anxiety or various reasons just didn't want to engage with any sort of questioning at the start of the lesson. And then it very quickly became a lecture because I wasn't getting that engagement. It became me, like I am now, like Amy mentioned, talking at a screen and talking at people who I presume are there and listening, which quite frankly isn't the most rewarding engagement or interaction the students are going to have. What I quickly switched to was this. Now, in my online classroom now, I still attempt and have a lot more success now with teacher-led questioning. Once again, that's just building the rapport with the students getting confidence in answering. I introduce some content. It's still introducing more than I perhaps would in a normal classroom because I don't have the opportunity to bounce back questions as maybe I would before. But I make a point now, if I've got an hour lesson, I limit myself to 30 minutes of questioning and delivery max. The remaining 30 minutes, I treat like a normal classroom. I set them an exercise, but I remain in that classroom with the students or in that virtual classroom with the students. So they're able to ask me like they would in a physical environment, help and support, and I can provide answers using a graphics tablet as we use here to provide them a little bit more understanding. So it's a little bit more back and forth than say it would be when we were previously trialing it. Things that have worked for us, the tried, tested and continually used, these are the things that we either did back in June but are now continuing to do. First one's which, presenting a PowerPoint. Once again, not trying to patronise you, I'm fully aware we've already done this, but as silly as it sounds, it's our teacher toolkit. It's one of the easiest things we can do using the Microsoft Teams platform. I'm very assured that they're there on other delivery platforms as well. Using the hands up tool. If any of you experience Microsoft Teams, it has a joyful little hand icon you can flick up and on. I think you can actually one in Zoom, I imagine, as well. With this tool, I've used it for two reasons, or two purposes. A basic binary response from students. You can, for example, if ever you've used flashcards or voting cards in your classroom, you're only limited to two options, of course, but hand up if you think the answer is question, or the answer is answer A, leave your hand down if you think the answer is B, and very quickly, even students that don't even want to type, you can get some sort of engagement from. And of course, allowing a student to sort of go, look, I've got an answer, let me volunteer it, and I can unmute my microphone to either pose a question or pose an answer to you. Recording a lesson and sharing that recording. I think Amy once again touched upon this brilliantly. The recordings are really powerful, not only for those students who can't make it, but also it gives us opportunities to do something we haven't previously been able to do, which is I've delivered a lesson and I want to re-deliver it to my students, but at a time that's suitable for them or convenient for them. They've just finished their tea at home. Right, I need to do Mr. Ravenscroft's homework. Right, there's his lesson. Let's watch the first 10 minutes because that's where he discussed topic X. So there are some silver linings to remote learning as well. And of course, the safeguarding aspect of recording a lesson just sort of covers our backs, one of a better way of putting it. And I think once again, Amy touched upon this, integrating other platforms into the learning. We are big fans at our School of Technology, obviously actually been a EdTech Demonstrator at school, but also things like Kahoot and quizzes, these formative or even summative assessment tools in place in some places, using these as part of the live learning. Most of my live lessons that I've got scheduled for next week, I've got a few groups that are out, isn't me talking over a PowerPoint. I've put together a big Kahoot quiz and we're going to do that live for that hour. So there's going to have a giant quiz for them to do. That interaction, that back and forth once again. The minefield that is safeguarding then, I'll touch on this briefly because I know there's many questions that can be asked here, not just from a sort of teacher perspective, but from a sort of an SLT and an entire school-wide perspective as well. What we do, as I said, some of you may have seen these resources before. Once again, they're on the link that has no doubt been shared already. There's an exemplar pupil and staff expectations during live delivery. This was produced in May. There's been a few alterations this side of the summer holiday, which I can sort of go through in a few moments' time. But on the left, you've got that expectation slide that I mentioned. Now, this is just at the start of every lesson for us. No matter who the group is, no matter how many times they've done it, it's there and presented to them. And that document on the right, I won't go through it in too much detail now, but it's an overview for not only student expectations, but also sort of expectations of staff, because we are still in the position where staff may be presenting from home. And of course, there's certain environments we perhaps don't want them presenting from. So things that have changed since lockdown, or things that have changed for us at our school since July. Key stage 3 students, so our younger years will now do live lessons when required. When we were trialling this and sort of rolling this out in June and July, it was very much our year 10s and year 12s at the time. They were our focus. It's now expected, but of course not mandated, that teachers are engaging with some form of interactive remote learning with the students and not just necessarily setting them a piece of work via an activity. That can obviously take the form of a recorded PowerPoint, for example, but there is now more of an expectation that there's something taking place, given that our contingency plan is there. And what we now have is a situation we didn't have last time, is lessons being delivered to students at home whilst the teacher's at school, but also the reverse. I've got a colleague who this morning, actually not yesterday, this morning, had to deliver a live lesson to a class who are in school, but the teacher themselves having to self-isolate. So it's a very different scenario to what, not everybody's at home at the same time. So what we do in a very brief nutshell, and obviously this is necessarily focused around Teams, but of course the same logic can be applied to any delivery platform. We have the chat disabled for Key Stage 3 currently. We've got a few sort of issues there with that, but for 4 and 5, it is enabled. With Key Stage 3, one of the issues we have is the size of the groups, but also a perceived immaturity amongst some of our teaching groups that we're kind of sort of dealing with. Going forward, we hope to be able to limit the chat feature for certain groups. Cameras are optional for students. Now, the reason we say optional, of course, we get to that point of anxiety. We've got some students who simply just don't want to be on camera, which is fine. We found, though, in many cases, actually having the student with a camera on can be beneficial. They get to see you, you get to see them, and it makes it a little bit more, I'm involved in something rather than, oh, sir's talking, I can relax and just, play PlayStation or whatever I'm going to do. All lessons are recorded, as I mentioned earlier, safeguarding reasons, but also probably from a teacher and learner perspective, more importantly, they're able to recap their learning. Members of staff are inviting HODs to the meetings now. So when we're setting up our Teams meetings, what we're doing, or Teams meeting for our students, we're also inviting heads of departments or members of SLT. One of the things we're big on at our school is trust, but we also have patrols, I think they call them, where people walk around the school and just drop into lessons, make sure everything's okay. Obviously, virtually, we can do that by inviting the head of department. Also allows them to see who's delivering what on a certain day. With the expectation slides, as I mentioned. And this one, thankfully, Microsoft have put some new features in that allow this to happen. We set up our meetings to ensure that students can't access them without the teacher being present. So there's no opportunity for students to sort of go into the classroom, so to speak, without the teacher being there. And we also make a point of making sure that the teacher is the only presenter in the meeting. So they're the only one that can mute or that can unmute other people and kick people or take control of a PowerPoint, for example, because kids are kids and they're going to try and do little things like that, especially with a new platform and a new toy in front of them. Of course, we're not in a position where we know it all. We've been on that journey so far. We continue on this journey and we're continually learning every day. This afternoon, I've sent an email to my staff, so my team, talking about what's happened today in Teams, what went well, what didn't go well. I've already got a couple of replies I need to go through. And that will just continually feed back into our approach to our live lesson delivery, which I anticipate being part of our procedures as teachers, at least up until the summer examinations, and who knows, perhaps a little bit further beyond that. I don't know if I shared them at the start. For anyone that hasn't got my email address, picture of me with my hair looking better than it currently does. You can email me at edtech@bishopchalloner.bham.sch.uk if you've got any questions about anything that I've just been through, or anything in general really relating to this. And obviously, if we can find time, I'm more than happy to get back to you. Other than that, I do hope, Laura, I've managed to keep to 10 minutes there. Unfortunately, my computer wasn't necessarily it's playing ball at this point in time, but that's me done really.
Thank you ever so much.